And we're back for episode 22 of Pursuing the Perfect Pint podcast. And Brent, I'm very curious to hear what Kasper, who really has a long and varied career in the malting and brewing industry, has to say, what his reflections are.
Yeah, and it was a really good opportunity to catch up with Kasper, who we've got to know well over the last years. So, but before we get into that, I guess we'll cover the market piece first, Danielle, and then we'll jump into the Kasper discussion. But starting with the market update.
On the market update, Brent, last week we spoke about two things really impacting barley, the weather and the Strait of Hormuz. And where are we sitting this week?
Yeah, more of the same, kind of repetitive, but it is the things that are most impactful. I guess if you think about the geopolitical element, so in the Middle East, we still just kind of seems like we get close to some kind of agreement, which maybe will alleviate all this disruption, but then it falls apart and we see crude oil spike again. So this is really a concern for the industry because it's going to have an impact on the whole supply chain. Farmers on fuel and fertilizer, cost of production in maltings and brewings. It's not going to help the whole inflationary thing that we've talked a lot about. So yes, geopolitical is a big headline still at the moment. And the other one is weather, which you mentioned. I'm doing the editorial for this week's journal, and I find that it's now weather season.
Yeah.
I've got a nice AI-driven image that created of me as a weatherman standing in front of a map.
Perfect.
Because I'm just watching weather maps all the time. And more importantly, I think when we talk about climate change, what's really coming through examples today, Danielle, is we are seeing the severity of climate change. And I'll give you a couple examples. So we have both ends of the spectrum. We have dry conditions in the U.S. wheat belts. Western Europe needs some moisture, so places like France are dry. And on the East Coast, northern New South Wales and Australia is extremely dry. So we see dryness being risked to the crop that's upcoming the growing season. At the very same time, in Russia, they have extreme moisture levels. So it's raining so much in parts of Russia, they can't even get in the field. So there's just an example of the extremes that I mentioned. We just see it all over the place. And this weather market has started. It seems a bit early, but it has started, and it tells me and what I write about a lot is the next 8 weeks we'll be watching the weather very closely. So me as a weatherman is going to be fairly prominent for the next couple months. So that's the key outline. More of the same, but I think the weather market is probably the biggest change. Barley prices haven't moved too much, a little bit of movement, but for the most part it's been fairly steady on the barley pricing element, but around that market, there's just a lot of things, outside market influence that we just need to be mindful of, and also the weather piece as well.
And are we still seeing very low liquidity on the barley side? Farmers
Yeah,
on?
Danielle, if you put yourself in the shoes of the farmer, and no matter where you are in that world I just described, if you're a farmer in Russia and you can't get in the field, you're not motivated seller. Or if you're in the US or in France or in Australia, as examples, you look out the window and see it's not ideal conditions by far. So you immediately pull back. You're not going to be selling something that you have question marks around how the crop's going to turn out. So liquidity, farmer selling has really, really dropped. It's been a problem for some time. And until we get a little more clarity on just how the conditions of the crop really look and we get a little further development in place, I think that's going to stay the course. We will see a limited ability of interest from farmers to sell, and that'll keep prices at least supported. It certainly won't drop in that environment.
And so, Brent, as we now rather look backwards, talking to Kasper rather than looking forwards and wondering what the weather's going to be like, I thought it was fascinating to listen to you and Kasper talk about his reflections on the malting and brewing industry and his advice for people who might be still in it or thinking of coming into the industry.
Yeah, and we'll let people hear it for themselves, but I guess it was, for me personally, it was rather easy to do because I've got to know Kasper quite well over the past years, and he's been a big supporter of RMI and the things we do, and I've helped him as much as I could with my insights. So it really was quite casual and natural, just because we just had a good chat. So let's have the people hear directly from our conversation. Okay. Well, we're here in Lisbon, Portugal, at the RMI conference, getting prepared for a busy week, but very pleased to take a few moments to catch up with Kasper Madsen from Viking Malt. And so first of all, thanks, Kasper, for joining us here in Lisbon.
My pleasure.
And more importantly, thanks for taking a few minutes to talk a little bit about your journey. You've got some exciting things in the works. So I guess we'll talk about that. But maybe for background, we could cover a little bit of where did your whole career start from a brewing perspective so long ago at Carlsberg? What was the initial job that you had in the brewing industry?
Yeah, but I actually went straight from the technical university into the Scandinavian School of Brewing. And then straight after that, when I graduated, I joined, at that time it was Carlsberg Tuborg. And then I've actually had a fantastic journey in the brewing industry in the first 25 years with Carlsberg. Different operational roles, and privileged to try many things in a young age. And then in the beginning of the 90s, I was expatriated, first to Thailand, later on to Malaysia, then UK, and then back again and heading the group supply chain for a number of years until I left in 2011.
Yeah.
So it is for sure close to my heart.
Yeah, for sure. 25 years, you would have seen a lot in that 25 years.
Yeah, but I haven't seen it all those the last 7-8 years plus in the malting industry. Then it has been extremely turbulent, and I'm sure we'll come back to that.
We'll come to that. So 25 years in brewing, and then you did spend some time in the consulting world and the food industry. So there was a little period in between.
But you're right. You have done your homework. So I joined the Boston Consulting Group as an advisor, which was extremely good for me because some will say I was a bit one-dimensional, brewing and so forth. So I had the pleasure to come in with very, very capable people working closely on a lot of, big transformation, supply chain optimization, also actually in the brewing industry, some of the projects, which was really good.
Yeah, so of course that makes sense. Your background for brewing, so you would have a lot that you could add to that discussion, but you also mentioned food. You did some things in the food industry as well.
Yeah, then after BCG, I felt I was a bit too young to kind of be, I'm not saying criticizing to be an advisor, but I think I wanted to be back in operations. And so that actually happened when approached by this job within Viking Malt.
Yeah. So leading Viking Malt since 2017. So we'd say 8 years. The clock has kept turning forward. So we now say maybe 9 years. But you have recently announced that you're going to, not in an immediate period, but in a gradual time, you will step away and maybe pursue some other things which we can talk about. But so with that in mind, these 8-9 years, they've been challenging. You used the word turbulent also, and I think that's true. Are there some highlights you've seen from your time in malting? Maybe there's been some things that impressed you about the industry, and maybe at the same time, what are some things that you think are maybe longer term challenges?
Yeah, there were a few questions here. I think the first thing what I really kind of admire, I think the malting industry is actually, it is a part of the brewing chain. So it is actually a social, like many brewers and also distillers and so on, because at the end of the day, you're producing something which creates a social product. So you have this human touch around it. So it's a part of a very attractive value chain, and also back to the farmers, where you really have people who are committed and long-term thinking about the job. So the whole value chain is extremely fascinating. And also, last point here, I think was also nice. Roasters in general are very close to the ground. It's hands-on people, and it's also on an event like this, you easily connect and so on. It's nice.
Yeah, it's really good. I've had, just on your point, I've had people that I worked with when I was back in the malting industry, and they went off and into other things that were non-malting industry related. But if I catch up with them, they still look fondly back at their time in malting, because it was all those things you mentioned. It was linked, of course, to beer, quite a social network, and also fundamentally, it's a unique industry. You've got the agricultural piece. It's a processed product, but it's also much different than flour milling or corn milling in some of these value add processes. So I think it's quite an interesting. So those people that spend some time in it, I think, always come away with a pretty good feeling of their time in malting, because it has a lot of things that are not easy to find elsewhere. So I guess that's one way you could summarize it. It does have its challenges, so we can't say it's easy and say to anyone that may listen to this podcast, come in, jump in the pool, the water's fine. No. That today we would say the water's not maybe as perfect as we'd like to see it. So we have overcapacity, and we've in a 3-year decline on beer volume. So it is a challenging time, and I guess that comes back to for your business and the way you manage it, it has to force you to think differently.
Absolutely. And I think if I should build on that point, I think when I joined, also with my brewing knowledge behind me, I had this feeling this is an industry where you have had these cycles, 7, 10 years, ups and downs, and so on. But you know, it's a resilient category. You will always, as a monster, land on our feet and so forth. And you could, to some aspect, maybe I'm exaggerating it, but prolong the future with wooden pieces. But I think the reality is that here there have been some changes in the overall environment, which just have been much more dramatic, more unpredictable than ever before. And that's what we maltsters have to get our mind.
Yeah. I often describe it as the period from the pandemic. So the pandemic to now, 7 years, there's no other way to describe it than that's probably the most disruptive period that we'll encounter in our whole lives. Hopefully that we've been through the worst, and there's been so much, and that's not to say that it's over with, but you talk about cycles, and cycles go up, cycles come down. The slightly discouraging point about this one is it's been much more prolonged. We would generally have thought of cycles. The pandemic cycle was rather short. The recovery was rather short, but now we've fallen into this longer term decline. And I guess we'll talk about it a lot this week, in the next couple of days in particular. I think there's a lot of hope. That's not a strategy, of course, but it would be a good, any sign that would kind of indicate that we're maybe starting to come over it would, I think, be boosting the spirits of people, because it has been prolonged, and I think that does start to weigh a little bit on people. Even I'm an admitted optimist, and I think it's even hard to be massively optimistic about the future. I will give my view of what we could look like in the next 2 or 3 years, and this will publish after I present this week. It's nothing terribly exciting. Like, it's not this. It is difficult to come up with a really, really aggressive rebound for all those things you touched upon. The structural changes in the market are going to leave us with a longer recovery period, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm fundamentally also an optimist, but hopes are difficult to put into the P&L. So therefore, we need, as business people, to be very realistic. What are the things we can actually influence here, and what is the future, the best guess of the future? And I think, back to your point, there are some headwinds which I fundamentally believe are more permanent or a bigger trend globally. The big one is, of course, generations, but maybe all of us moving a bit away from alcohol consumption. But again, I think you cannot sit down and say and feel miserable. You have to do something. So we have the privilege as maltsters with sitting with a fantastic product, and which have a lot of benefit. So I think it is an obligation for us to think as many, and we will definitely also hear about that. It's already happening. So it's not kind of a new thing as such. But we have to find a way to use our process, our raw material, in a much broader context. And it could be food, other drinks, and so on. And it should be possible. So it's again this mindset, use the difficulties. Then we have to take some of the tougher measures in our businesses to correct these trends which are affecting all of us right now.
I think I totally agree with you. And I think we haven't used the word yet, but there's a naturalness to malt. I think one of the holding backs that has taken place is the fact that the naturalness of malt in the use of beer or for the use of whiskey is lost in a way, because it's hard to talk about a healthy alcohol-containing product like beer or whiskey. So even though malt is very natural and comes from the farm and all these things, we've been held back in a way from being able to explore too much about it because of the alcohol. But your point is, if you step out of that and you get into another place where that naturalness can be very advantageous, and you don't have the alcohol constraint, if I call it that way, that could be a door opener. That could be the sort of thing that takes it in. So we will talk about it this week when we talk about thinking differently, thinking beyond, like brewers. You used to be one. I used to work for one. They think beyond beer. So they've widened their portfolio and done all these things. You mentioned it. Maltsters are going in a similar direction. It's not necessarily as easy, but if you want to move beyond traditional beer production or traditional whiskey production, there are lots of opportunities, but you're starting from a very small base. So that recovery period or the development period is going to be elongated from that side. So there's opportunities, but we also have to be realistic that the time horizon to capture those is going to be not short.
And then you have one more dimension to add. When you go into these categories, which you have to and should explore, you add complexity to your business, the value chain in your business. And it is in a period where your core business is under cost pressure. Yeah. So therefore, you have to, as a business leader, manage this, scale complexity all the time, and also how you allocate your internal resources. So that's the game. But there's no, you can sit and say, it's very, very difficult. Yeah. But you just have to find a path where you can do it the right way. There's no other way.
Yeah. I don't know what the analogy is. Like when you're busy trying to survive, it's very hard to step back and think that you're just going to take a moment to reflect on what you could do differently, because you're so wrapped up in just getting the day to day and the here and now kind of addressed. And so it takes some work to prioritize things in the right sequence and focus on the most important stuff.
That's one of the reasons why we have many women in Viking Mat, because they're better in multitasking.
Yeah, sure.
So they have to help us out now.
Well, it's good you mentioned we have a whole session in the agenda this week for women, talking about leadership and managing change and from the energy perspective. So myself, I think it's important, and I think we can do a lot more to profile the good work that women are doing. The brewing industry is still quite male dominated, so I think there's lots more that we can do across the brewing and distilling and malt supply chain. But we need some help on the multitasking, but maybe in other ways, men can be quite focused. And
which we also need. Yeah. So, but that's the reason why we need a balance. Life is a balance.
So as you kind of think about, you're gonna do some things to keep busy going forward, but maybe as you start to think about transitioning out of the malting industry, what kind of words of advice would you maybe give those of us that are still staying around connected? Like, is there anything you'd like to say that gives people something food for thought on what they should do and focus on in the years ahead?
I think yes. Well, let me try to be brief on that. I think don't miss this as maltsters, that we should still be close to the ground. And both on customer side and the way we are managing the companies, I think that's a key strength. I think we have maybe grown up, many of us, leading the malting business with this lean concept and minimizing waste and all that. So you have all these the 5 whys, why things cannot be done differently and so on. But I think now we are in an era where we also, business leaders, have to say, why not? Why not try things out? Also scenario planning. What if you're doing this? If this happened, why not do that? And so on. So I think it's this that I think it's very important to be open-minded.
Yep.
And I think it's also very important for leadership that you have to change direction fairly quickly. And if we just say that's a given, you have to take the time and effort to tell the team, stakeholders, all that, why are you changing direction or decision? Because otherwise people will get paralyzed. And I think we are living, no matter if you're a brewer or maltster, we are living in an industry where people are coming more or less to the same malting plant, they've seen the same process. So sometimes it's difficult to understand why we need to change all the time. So this communication and leadership requirements will change. I think that's one to have in mind.
Yeah. Managing change in difficult times is really, it's important, but it's not easy.
Yeah. So therefore, I think it's also this having international experience, in a critical mass of international experience, people who have been a bit around the block and try things out. That is key, because now you need people who have a steady hand through difficult times.
Yeah. No, I liked the way you described it. I've built into my presentation that I think, in a sense, the industry is at a bit of a crossroads, and we have to think about, either we think differently and try all these various options that are available, or I guess we could stay on the path that we've been on. But I think history would tell us that just keeping on the same path hasn't worked. We look at beer volumes over the past 25 years, and it has not really gone anywhere. So we can't assume that something miraculous is going to happen and all of a sudden things turn around. So I think we need to step out of that comfort zone, and sometimes you'll get it a little bit off the mark, so you're going to have to adjust, but better trying than not trying at all.
And sometimes do it now, and if it doesn't, then iterate on it and then adjust. I think that's a bit key.
So you've enjoyed your time.
Absolutely. It's been a fantastic work life in it. So now I'm heading towards something which I still need. I think it's for all of us the moment that come. We need also to keep this going. Time is, when you get older, it's just nature. Time is getting a limited factor. And I've always been of the opinion, Kasper, don't stop as this boxer who took a few rounds too much. So stop when it works, both for you and the business, and then say, now it's time to. And here I've had a fantastic dialogue with the owners for a while, and we have landed, I feel, a super process and way forward, and I will stay connected both with the business and the industry, hopefully for foreseeable future, but that's a little bit to be ironed out.
Yeah. Well, so I'll say a smooth transition and not go away entirely. I will wrap it up by saying, and I've said this to you before, but I'll say it. I've really enjoyed our interactions over the past 8 years. It's always been first class and positive, and I've learned a lot along the journey. I hope I have helped in some way to contribute.
You helped both us and myself.
Yeah. So with all that, I wish you all the best in the future. I think
Thanks.
now, the rest of this week, we have one task to do, and that's to pursue the perfect pint. And we're going to do that. And we'll start with that tonight, in fact.
Yeah.
So look forward to sharing a beer with you and carrying on the conversation. But all the best, and thanks for taking some time.
Thank you so much, Brent.
All the best.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Brent, what a brilliant interview, and so much to take out from that. But I suppose my favorite comment probably from that was, you can't put hope into the piano.
Yeah. Well, there was some real nuggets of value in that discussion. I said, well, hope's not a strategy, which we often hear that, and it's a common phrase. I think Kasper just took it to another level when he said, and you can't put hope in the P&L. So, as the CEO of the business, I guess he's always thinking about the bottom line, and the P&L is important, of course. So I think it was a great way to put it on there. But some of the other things that I thought Kasper talked about, which is really good when you have that discussion, like the people in the industry are very grounded. He said that a couple times. I think that's a great way to describe the industry. That people are down to earth, grounded. They just get on with things, and that's super. It's challenging times, and we got into all that discussion of having to think differently and change leadership and all these things. But stay grounded was one of his key pieces of advice. I think that was an amazing way to put it. So I was quite happy to have that description there, because I think it's really valid.
And I also like to sort of challenge on a leadership side, where I think the industry for many years, it was all very stable, and we've had several years of quite a lot of disruption. And now you've got, as we were just talking about earlier, ongoing climate change and weather disruption. How does the malting industry, which is quite traditional, adapt to that in terms of broadening its consumer base, or thinking about how it adapts to weather variability? I think that was a great challenge to any future leader in the malting supply chain.
Yeah, sure. And, in the video, I talked about this period, the most disruptive period, hopefully the most disruptive period that all of us will encounter in our careers, this since the pandemic in 2020 through now. And like we saw in Lisbon, Danielle, it's amazing how resilient people stay, and they stay grounded. They just get to work. They just keep moving forward. They know that they need to go beyond traditional beer and traditional whiskey, which is not easy. And you're starting from a very small base, like we talked about in the video. But people are just up for the challenge, and they just keep getting on with it, which I think is amazing. That's resiliency already in itself. So I think that gives us some confidence that going forward, people will stay focused. But it will be a challenging period ahead for the next years as we kind of move forward and hopefully get clear of some of these ongoing disruptions and get into at least a little more calmness. But that doesn't change the fact that people really need to think differently.
Absolutely. And I think it'd be brilliant to have Kasper come back in a few years' time to share some of his reflections, even a few years on, in what he does next in the brewing supply chain.
Yeah, I think he's going to stay involved in some way. So I think we'll be able to search him out, and I think he'd be happy to come back and share some more. But it was really good that he took some time. So much appreciative. He's been a friend of RMI, as I said, and we're very appreciative of that. And the discussion was amazing. So really good.
And I think, Brent, between being Brent the Weatherman, we look forward to what Brent the Weatherman has to say next week as we go to another episode of Pursuing the Perfect Pint.
Yeah, we'll be exploring. We're going to be moving from different parts of the world. We've got both Europe, US, and other parts of the world. We're pursuing the perfect pint globally. So stay tuned.
Cheers.
Cheers.